October 20th, 1977, was a date that would perpetually reverberate through the lobbies of music history, yet not for the reasons anybody had expected. Lynyrd Skynyrd, the Southern demigods, had quite recently dropped their game-changing collection Road Survivors 3 days earlier. Their star was radiating brilliantly as they became the overwhelming focus at the Greenville Commemoration Hall in Greenville, North Carolina. At the center of attention, they sparkled more than ever with famous hits, for example, Sweet Home Alabama and Free Bird. Electuring the crowd, Lynyrd Skynyrd was taking off to new levels of notoriety, and a major American visit would follow. Yet in the background, a chilling destiny was shutting in. Much to their dismay, this would be the last time the establishing individuals from the band would perform together after Road Survivors hit the racks on October 17th. Lynyrd Skynyrd began a major visit across America, as opposed to depending on business flights or spending extended periods on a visit transport. The boycott settled on the choice to lease a Conceal V-240 double-prop plane for their movement between show scenes. This decision permitted them to arrive at their objections quicker and more straightforward, obliging their occupied with visiting plans. Strangely, only months earlier, Aerosmith had considered leasing a similar plane. However, their administration declined it because of security concerns, particularly in the wake of noticing the pilot and co-pilot drinking from a jug of Jack Daniels during an examination, and this choice might have saved their lives. Following a show in Lakeland, Florida, Lynyrd Skynyrd traveled to Greenville, South Carolina for their next show on October 19th, 1977. During the flight, a 10 FT stream of starts and blazes shot from the plane's right motor. Some musicians quickly raised worries about the plane in any event, telling the lead vocalist Ronnie Van Zant that they would leave the visit except if they got an alternate airplane. Cassie, the reinforcement singer and sister of guitarist Steve Gaines, was so terrified of the plane that she would prefer to go in the band's confined hardware truck. All things considered, yet Van Zant persuaded her to get onto the plane. Exchanging planes implied dropping event dates, something Zant unequivocally went against. He accepted the band couldn't simply leave their unwavering Southern fans. They needed to load onto that plane. By and by, much to their dismay, the destiny that looked for them on October 20th, after a jolting show in Greenville, the musicians and team loaded up the 30-year-old plane that would fly them to Rod Rouge, Louisiana. At the time, Lynyrd Skynyrd flaunted a setup highlighting performer Ronnie Van Zant, guitarist Steve Gaines, Alan Collins, and Gary Rossington, drummer Artemis Heat Premises, Leon Wilson, and keyboardist Billy Powell. Likewise, to these center individuals, the band was supplemented by a threesome of skilled female reinforcement vocalists, by and large known as the Honnet. This triplet comprised of Leslie Hawkins, JoJo Billingsley, and Cassie Gaines. As they loaded onto the plane, Van Zant was heard telling Cassie in the event that "Your time is up, your time is up." While he attempted to console her, the band's next objective was Louisiana State College, where they were booked to play out the next night. The expectation was high, and spirits were taking off as they took off close to nothing. Did they had any idea that this excursion would accept a terrible turn of the plane? Were 26 travelers, including the musicians. However, simply 20 would live to see one more day. That evening, the main stretch of the 700m trip to Mallet Rouge was going great, yet towards the finish of their flight, the pilots made a frightening acknowledgement. The airplane was running nearly out of fuel, and Dices was sneaking unexpectedly. The right motor quit working. This was the very motor that created issues on the past flight, and in a frantic endeavor to move fuel from the passed-on motor to the right, the flight team unintentionally casted off the rest of their fuel. Into the air, frenzy set in as they understood they needed more fuel to come to their objective. Urgency dominated, and the pilots attempted to adjust their direction. They were going for the Gold Air Terminal, Mome Pike Air Terminal, only a couple of miles outside Momie, Mississippi. However, they before long confronted an unforgiving reality: they didn't have sufficient fuel to make it there to exacerbate things at 10,000 ft. No fuel staying the left propeller likewise quit working the plane, started to fall, and this left them with no choice except for to endeavor a crisis arrival in an open field in the event that they needed any possibility enduring in the meantime. The travelers on board were totally uninformed about the difficult circumstance unfurling around them. Ronnie Van Zant was nestled into a cushioned sound, snoozing in the path at the rear of the plane. He had been out celebrating the prior night and frantically required some rest. Different travelers were playing poker, attempting to sit back. Everything appeared to be a run-of-the-mill trip until the drummer Artemis Heap chose to visit the cockpit and mind the flight team. The second he entered the lodge, a noticeably terrified pilot named Walter McCreer earnestly taught him to get back to his seat and lock in. The seriousness of the circumstance turned out to be exceptionally clear, and a sensation of uneasiness immediately spread all through the whole plane. Most travelers sat in dazed quietness, shutting their eyes and holding their clenched hands, while others implored, expecting a supernatural occurrence. Guitarist Gary Rossington distinctively recalled a chilling commotion that seemed like many home run sticks raising a ruckus around town of the plane as it started striking trees. They went past the planned landing region and were left with no decision except for to collide with a damp, lush region as they brushed the treetops. For very nearly 1,000 ft, the clamor got increasingly loud until the plane stopped in a 3 ft thick pine tree. The effect tore the plane totally separated in the 10 to 12 seconds it took to go from 100 mph to an unexpected stop. This power tossed the travelers out of the plane and onto the woods ground. Rossington dropped during the accident, and when he recaptured cognizance a few minutes after the fact, he wound up on the ground with the plane's entryway on top of him. In his befuddled state, he took a gander at the scene and immediately understood that the plane was totally obliterated. The wings and tail had been removed, and the cockpit containing the departed pilot had isolated totally. The plane had slid 500 ft after influence, abandoning a path of destruction in an odd spot of destiny. The non-attendance of fuel, which was the underlying reason for the accident, ended up being a surprisingly good development. It kept the plane from blasting into blazes upon influence, possibly saving many lives anyway. In spite of the shortfall of fire, not all were sufficiently fortunate to endure well. Before that disastrous flight, Ronnie Van Zant transparently communicated an eerie conviction that he wouldn't live to arrive at his 30th birthday celebration. His dad distinctively recollected their discussions. He shared with me, "Ordinarily, Daddy, I won't ever be 30 years of age." I'd address him, "For what reason are you talking this way? You won't come to 30. And he'd continuously answer, "Daddy, that is my coot off." His kindred musicians were not safe to these disrupting expectations. Either drummer Artemis Heap reviewed a discussion they had in Tokyo, Japan. Ronnie let me know that he could never live to see 30, and that he would go out with his boots on, all in all, out and about. I said, "Gracious Ronnie, don't talk like that." However, the man realized his predetermination. Even Ronnie's better half, Judy, had heard him discuss his approaching destiny so as often as possible that she couldn't excuse it. She said, "When I heard that there had been a plane accident, I just realized Ronnie was one of the ones that didn't make it. He told me so often that I understood that he truly understood what he was referring to, and unfortunately his hunch did for sure work out." 87 days before his 30th birthday celebration, Ronnie Van Zant unfortunately lost his life in the staggering plane accident. He was brutally tossed from his seat, hit his head against a compartment, and passed on quickly anyway. The accident guaranteed the frontman, Ronnie Van Zant, as well as, likewise, guitarist Steve Gaines, who passed on, influence backing performer Cassie Gaines, who was tossed from the plane and kicked the bucket not long after the band's street director senior member Kilpatrick, who was found dead in a bog in the arrangement's two pilots Walter McCree and William Dark. While most of survivors were situated towards the back of the plane, nobody got away without serious wounds. Keyboardist Billy Powell experienced extreme wounds, including a nose that was almost removed and broad facial and leg slashes, almost prompting lethal. Draining guitarist Gary Rossington broke the 2 arms, the 2 legs, the 2 wrists, the 2 lower legs, and his pelvis, and drummer Artemis Heap experienced various broken ribs in the accident anyway. In spite of his wounds, Heap some way or another figured out how to explore through a difficult territory of a marshy brook and a dim field to arrive at a close-by farmhouse. For help it was getting dull, and there was a helicopter above looking for survivors, yet, since there was no fire, nothing remained to be seen. Heap endured crossing a security barrier supporting cut wounds all the while. However, as he moved toward the farmhouse, a man arose with a rifle. The man hollered end, yet Heap was in shock and staggered forward. The rancher then, at that point, shot him in the left shoulder, making him twist and fall. The effect twirled him around, and he fell, accepting it very well. Maybe his last minutes, wheezing for breath. He figured out how to shear the words "plane accident." The rancher immediately raced to help, saying sorry for the misconception he conveyed. Heap into his home, where a gathering of inquisitive ranch youngsters, assembled crisis responders, quickly showed up at the scene, surging everybody to different clinics. A nearby worker fireman portrayed the grim scene of the destruction, referencing that he staggered north of a few casualties who were as yet alive at this turbulent second. Those whose lives were saved that day were not promptly educated regarding the lamentable fatalities. Gary Rossington, for example, stayed uninformed about Ronnie Van Zant's shocking passing for a few days, possibly learning of it when his mom conveyed the grievous news in the outcome of the episode. The public, nay transportation well-being load up, resolved that the reasonable justification of this mishap was fuel depletion and complete loss of force from the 2 motors because of team distractedness to fuel supply, adding to the fuel fatigue with deficient flight arranging and a motor breakdown of unsure nature in the right motor, which came about in higher than ordinary fuel utilization. Anyway, the NTSB explained that the motor glitch itself, in all probability, wasn't that large an arrangement, despite the fact that assessment of the motor and its parts didn't recognize the specific disparity. The well-being board accepts that the error was of an overall sort, like a start or enlistment issue, and was not a significant mechanical disappointment at last. The accident was credited to team in consideration regarding fuel supply, as per the NTSB's last assurance. Unfortunately, the band's heartbreaking history didn't end there. In 1986, a staggering auto crash left establishing part and guitarist Alan Collins deadened, while his sweetheart unfortunately kicked the bucket on influence. Collins passed on January 23, 1990, from persistent pneumonia, an entanglement of the loss of motion. The band's bassist on the hour of the accident, Leon Wilson, was found dead in his lodging on July 27, 2001. His passing was credited to emphysema and constant liver sickness. Adding to the band's rundown of misfortunes, in 2009, keyboardist Billy Powell died after a respiratory failure. The first Lynyrd Skynyrd arrived at its decision when Gary Rossington, the final unique part, tragically died on Spring 5, 2023. The reason for his demise was not revealed anyway. He had a background marked by coronary illness, with north of 60 collections created, which have sold more than 30 million duplicates. Overall rowdy lobby of famers. Lynyrd Skynyrd remain music symbols that enticement for all ages. On the off chance that you found this video educational or interesting, if it's not too much trouble, offer it a go ahead and buy into the feed.